Hello and welcome everybody. This is Grandmaster Sam Shankland, and today I would like to conclude my series on Elite in Development. So previously we were talking about how Elite in Development can basically increase or decrease, and that it can't really stay static, and you have to either be increasing it or decreasing it. And the best way to increase Elite in Development is to develop with threats, bring more pieces out, and force Black to respond to that. But we're also going to notice that you can basically just try to, the last thing Elite in Development can matter is you can just try to crush someone in the center before their pieces get out, and which leads to catastrophic losses. So the next game I'd like to speak about is a game between the young Chinese phenom Wei Yi and Alexander Arashenko, which was played at last year's FIDE World Cup in Baku. So game begins e4, c5, knight f3, d6, d4, takes, knight f6. So quickly we get to a Najdorf, and we end up in this poison pawn variation where it's funny because we actually just saw a Najdorf in the previous video as well, where black went queen b6 and queen takes b2. But in this case, he's much better equipped to play this way. So it's much tougher. So queen b6, queen d2, takes, rook b1, queen a3. And here, Black is up a pawn, and a very good pawn at that, if given time to play moves like bishop e7, knight bd7, queen c5, queen c7, castle b5. Black will simply be up a pawn, and a very good one, and he's just going to be completely winning. This takes a lot of time, though, and what White wants to do is sort of crush Black before he can do something like that. So White has several moves in this position, but I think the one Wei played is most principal, which is e5, immediately aiming to crush Black in the center. And here we're starting to see the point of having Elite in Development. So let's say now Black played h6 and d takes e5, f takes e5. And here Black played g5 in the game, but let's discuss other moves. Knight d7 is probably the most common move. And after knight e4, queen takes a2, rook d1, queen d5, queen e3, the Elite in Development is really growing, and it's something that Black should be very worried about. This has been played several times, and because this video is, the opening of this game is sort of outside the scope of the video, I'm not going to discuss it, but it's something that, I could certainly talk about more. So instead, though, Arashenko chose the move g5. And here White does not really want to retreat the bishop because it allows Black, let's say after bishop g3, to play knight h5, gaining another tempo on this bishop, and after something like bishop g7, Black's ready to castle next, and he seems to be doing all right. While similarly bishop f2 would fail to knight g4 with the same problems, gaining another tempo on the bishop, and again after bishop g7, Black's ready to castle, and his position is kind of okay. And it's important to notice that Black couldn't actually do this until he played g5. Let's say Black had played something like knight g4 here, which makes a lot of sense, getting the knight out of the way and trying to attack the e5 pawn. What do you think White should play? Okay, so if you want more time, keep your videos paused. When you have Elite in Development, especially with an open board, you should always be looking for direct tactics. And here, you notice that if this knight were not there, then queen d8 would be mate. So if you just move this knight, Black actually has to respect the threat of queen d8. So White has a very nice move here, knight db5, which is very, very strong and just brings the knight into the attack. Knight takes e6 also looks extremely tempting. And here, there's a little bit of calculation to be done after f takes e6 because queen d8 isn't actually mate with the king running to f7, but very quickly you realize that White simply takes the bishop back on c8 and he remains a piece to the good, and he has a very good position. That wouldn't work. Black instead chose g5, and instead of retreating the bishop, White played e takes f6, and now g takes h4. So here, White's pawn on f6 is pretty weak and likely to fall at some point, and Black has a bishop pair and an extra pawn, but if you look, his queen is out. Every single other piece he has is stuck on its original starting square, and in particular, he's got to be very worried that this open center will soon spell doom for his king. So the game continued bishop e2, and now Black chose queen a5. This is certainly not a bad move, but it's a sign that Black should really be worried because his pieces are being pushed backwards. And again, his pieces have not developed. So castles, knight d7, and now because White sort of needs to try to find a way to crash through with this, he doesn't really have a way to stop a move like queen c7 and then bishop c5. These moves can't be stopped. He's not going to stop Black from developing, but what he can do is try to bust Black with energetic play before Black can get his pieces into the game to defend. So White chose the move rook b d1. I think this is a very good move, and it goes back to what we were previously talking about in maneuvering. What is the worst placed piece? Well, all of white's pieces are sort of in the game, but this rook on b1 is sort of attacking a b7 pawn that's not doing much. It doesn't seem very effective. The place it wants to be is d1, where it can fight for control of the open file. So h3, g3, white just wants to keep his king safe, bishop b4. And here white could certainly play sort of a passive-ish move like rook f3, trying to defend the knight. But of course, white should be a little bit more ambitious than that and try to bust black's king open right away while black lags behind. And indeed, Wei played a really strong move here. So I'd like everyone to please pause their videos and see if they can figure out what Wei chose in this position. Okay, so if you want more time, please keep your videos paused. Wei played queen e3, which is a very strong move. He's aiming to simply start blowing up the black king with knight takes e6. The black king is stuck in the center. He can't ever castle, really, on account of queen takes h6 with queen g7 mate on the way. That's not going to work. So it's very hard for him to actually hold his center together. Knight takes e6 is a crushing threat, but what's black actually going to do about it? If, let's say, he defends by queen b6, well, this runs into another very energetic move developing with a threat. So see if you guys can figure out what white should play here. Okay, if you want more time, please keep your videos paused. At this moment, white can play knight d5, improving his pieces even further and now gaining more time by attacking the queen. After something like queen d6, knight takes b4, I would be very tempted to start taking on e6 here, but even a simple move like knight f5 is likely very good for white. With knight d6 on the way, I think black is unlikely to survive. So, if queen b6 doesn't work, how else is black going to defend this pawn? Well, he could move this knight, but after something like knight c5, once again, knight d5 just jumps straight in, and a lot of black's pieces are hanging, and he seems to be under a great deal of pressure. Knight f5 could be next, and I think black's just falling apart at the seams, and it's really hard to find another move. I think queen e5 was probably the most resilient, but so still, after something like queen e5, knight e4, I would be very worried for black's safety. White's going to start sacrificing stuff very, very soon. And this is another thing, is even in a very sharp position like this one, where white is trying to crush black, not tear you around by preventing development, you realize it's still not easy for black to actually get his pieces out, because this bishop on c8 is stuck behind the knight and behind the pawn. King can't really castle. It's a tough situation. So black tried bishop takes c3, but this leads to trouble. Knight takes c6. And now at this point, it's sort of senseless to keep talking about the lead in development, and instead we should start calculating concrete variations. So white has a lot of threats with this move. Black's position is really starting to fall apart, and the first question you should ask is what happens if this knight is taken, and here after queen takes e6 check, king d8, it looks like black is safe for the moment, but ultimately white can play queen e7 check, and now queen d6 check, and black's king is still stuck in the kill zone. And here probably the simplest move is f7, and the threat of f8 is utterly devastating, and black is just completely crushed. So that would not be good. Black instead tried to block the e-file, which makes a lot of sense, not allowing the absolute devastation to crash through. But the problem is there's not really a good way to do it. Knight e5 would be nice because it gets the knight out of the way and you're preparing to play the bishop out. But unfortunately, white can play rook d8 check. It's important not to get flashy with queen takes c3, because then after queen b6 check, still probably after knight c5 or knight d4, white's doing really well, but it's just not as clean. Rook d8 check simply wins the game because now black must take with the queen, and here after queen takes c3, white is left with extra material and the black king is still wide open. So knight e5 doesn't work. Bishop e5 was in theory possible, but this runs into all sorts of other problems. I'd be very tempted to play a move like bishop h5, and once again here, black is almost in Zugzwang. He can hardly move. He would love to play a move like queen b6, with the idea to just trade queens and run away with the game, but he can't because after queen takes b6, knight takes b6, rook d8 is checkmate. So here, white's threats are coming very, very soon, and black is really almost in stalemate. He can't move this knight on account of mate on d8. The bishop on c8 is blocked in by the knight on d7. The king can't get out of the pin with this pawn on f7. And the bishop on e5 can't move without pain of a discovered check, and it doesn't take white long to organize a winning attack. And you can't really move the queen anywhere useful because queen takes e5 is a threat. For instance, let's say queen takes a2. I mean, it's a ridiculous move any which way, but just as an illustration of a point, here white can play queen takes e5, and black is unable to take back because of rook d8. And this is sort of the more classical lead in development at its finest in the sort of romantic era, thinking, oh, the lead in development leads to bone-crunching attacks where the king just perishes in the center. And this can certainly happen, but as we've seen in the previous two games, that's definitely not the only way to make use of a lead in development. So in the game, black found nothing better than queen e5, but this left him in a very sorry state after a strong move knight c7 check, and now black had to play king to f8, and after queen takes e5, bishop takes e5, knight takes a8. The lead in development is gone, knight takes f6, and black getting his pieces out just fine, but unfortunately for him, it came at a steep price. White has won in exchange for a pawn, and black doesn't have nearly enough compensation for it. In addition, his pawn on h3 is just weak. So knight b6, and if black could somehow keep his bishops on the board, maybe he would be able to claim some play, but here he can't do it, because if something like bishop e6, you can play bishop c4, and soon enough these bishops are going to come off, and there's nothing black can really do about it. So this would cause great difficulties. Instead, black tried king g7, but now after knight takes c8, without the bishop pair, black really has no compensation for the missing material. So again, like the other cases, the lead in development led to something concrete, and here we're just going to spend a few minutes discussing how well you put the game away. So rook f5 is a nice move, just putting pressure on the bishop on e5. Black retreated to b8, presumably with the idea of going to a7, and Wei just allowed it. He didn't seem to care. Rook df1. Now this knight is hit, and if it moves, the f7 pawn will fall. So black played bishop a7 check and landed the bishop on d4, which makes a lot of sense. The bishop's really active there and defends everything. It defends the f6 knight, and it's potentially looking at doing some kind of active role on the queen side. Pretty quickly, we can see two can play at that game, as white chose to move bishop d3, which is also very strong because it defends the c2 pawn. It prevents king g6, and white is very solid, and, slowly but surely, he's going to untangle his position and win the game. So black played rook c6, overprotecting the knight on f6, which is the weak point, and white charged ahead with g4. His idea with this move is to play g5, which will force black to play h takes g5, because if he moves the knight, then the f7 pawn will fall, and that's not okay. So after rook c7, g5, takes, we see the point, king f8. And you might say, well, you've just traded this g-pawn for black's doubled h-pawn, it was useless. But now, white has opened up enough lines for his rooks that after the simple move, rook g3, he is able to collect that annoying pawn on h3, and then he will just be an exchange up for nothing. So black tried to get as much activity as he could, but unsurprisingly, it turned out to be insufficient. Knight d5, rook takes h3, knight e3, rook f4, and the rooks are fully activated. Bishop a7, and now there's plenty of ways to go forward. Wei chose rook e4, which seems good enough for me. Now he had to calculate pretty precisely here, because after knight d1, knight f2 is menaced, which will fork absolutely everything, but Wei was ready for it. He played rook h8 check, king g7, and a very nice move. Let's see if you guys can find it. Alright, if you want more time, keep your videos paused. Wei played rook h7 check, gaining a tempo on the king, and using the fact that if black were to take on h7 after rook e7 check, white will take the rook as well, and he'll be a clean exchange up with a bunch of pawns falling, and black should resign. So black couldn't do that. He had to move his king again. He can't play king g8 because of rook e8 mate, so he chose king f8. But now simply rook c4. There's no more fork to worry about. The rook is threatening to exchange. Of course, black can't exchange this because here f7 and b7 and everything is hanging, and white's just going to take all the goodies. So black tried bishop c5 just to try to keep more material on the board, but after one more good move, bishop g6, he decided he had seen enough because rook takes f7 is an unstoppable threat. F takes g6 fails to rook takes c7, and if black just makes a move of some kind, say knight b2, you'd have to play rook f4. That's, of course, more than good enough, and the pawn on f7 will fall, and again, white's still an exchange up. We'll get a pawn as well, and black king's open. And if black plays something like king g8, aiming to get f takes g6 in at some point, I think rook f4 is still good, but rook takes f7 is very nice as well. The point being rook takes f7, bishop f7, king f7, rook c5. So this was kind of a different kind of game than the previous two we spoke about, where the lead in development was used in sort of the crushing manner as opposed to just a dynamic advantage manner. Here, Wei just decided I need to crash straight through. But even this, we saw eventually the lead in development was cashed in for something else, namely that rook in the corner, which left white with an extra exchange. So the things that you should always remember about a lead in development is that it is a dynamic advantage. It is either increasing or decreasing. It just is not going to be staying the same. And if you develop with threats, you're going to get your pieces out in a more effective way. And if the position calls for it, and if there's enough weaknesses and the king is stuck in the center, you can use your lead in development to try to crash through with a decisive attack. So that'll conclude my series on the lead in development. Thank you for watching, and have a good day.